Hi, my name is Sunita Williams, and I am a space operations engineer with a background in human spaceflight and robotics. Right now, I'm a project manager at Mission Control, which is a space exploration and robotics company, and we're developing software for space robotics and autonomous systems to enable both human and robotic lunar exploration with a focus on mission operations and AI. I'm also the founder of a platform called Rocket Women, which aims to inspire the next generation of young women to choose a career in STEM. Now, I want you to imagine that the year is 2030 and you're an astronaut standing on the surface of the moon. You and two other astronauts, a Canadian and an American, have completed the 3-day journey into orbit around the moon in NASA's Orion capsule and have docked to the Lunar Gateway, a new mini space station in lunar orbit, a vision developed and built by global space agencies. Yesterday, on board the Gateway, you used an exoskeleton system to remotely drive a rover to explore the lunar surface. And you also control the lunar rover's robotic arm to take lunar rock samples. And today, after 5 years of grueling astronaut training, you physically piloted a lunar lander vehicle embarking from the Gateway in lunar orbit and stepped foot onto the surface of the moon. Now, that vision that I just described isn't just an idea. The Lunar Gateway is currently being designed by the European Space Agency in conjunction with international partners such as NASA, the Japanese Space Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency to enable humanity to return to the vicinity of the moon in the 2020s, building on the international cooperation that built the International Space Station. The Global Space Agency is working to turn those elements I described into reality. The spaceship will be humanity's next step beyond low Earth orbit. It's 1,000 times further out into the solar system than the International Space Station. Its location here, in the lunar facility outside of the Earth's deep gravity well, allows it to be used as a staging post for exploration missions to the lunar surface and eventually to other deep space destinations, including Mars. It's a platform where we'll learn to overcome the technological challenges of living and working in deep space. The Gateway is part of NASA's Artemis program, which aims to send the next man and the first woman to the surface of the moon as early as even 2024.
And as we leave the moon, we leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return.
You probably dreamed of this.
Liftoff on Apollo 11.
You probably replayed this moment 1,000 times. You probably imagined the awe-inspiring, indescribable rush of the ride. You probably celebrated the miraculous, cheered the momentous, and mourned the shocking. You probably still dream of what could be. We did. We do. And while many thought we were through, no. We've been learning, we've been building, we've been training. And now, it's time. Because the next frontier is not just for the next generation. It's for this generation. It's for me, and it's for you. For everything we still dream about. We go as Artemis.
So how do we get there and how do we build Gateway? Well, we'll travel to the Deep Space Gateway or Lunar Gateway with NASA's Orion spaceship, for which the European Space Agency are building the life support and propulsion systems. Orion is our new bridge to deep space. It's returning humans there for the first time in over 50 years, sustained by European technology. Orion and the Gateway will enable the first European astronaut missions ever beyond low Earth orbit where the International Space Station is. The Gateway is a destination for astronaut expeditions and science investigations, as well as a port for deep space transportation, including landers en route to the lunar surface, or even spacecraft embarking on destinations beyond the moon. Right now, we focus development on the initial critical systems required to support the human lunar landing, so the power propulsion element and the habitation and logistics outpost, which will be the initial crew cabin for astronauts visiting the Gateway, and to provide basic life support and after they arrive and prepare for the trip to the lunar surface. Canada has also officially announced its participation in the exciting next chapter of lunar exploration, and that will include a smart robotics system known as Canadarm3 for the Gateway, and also a new program for Canadian lunar science and technology. Currently, where I work at Mission Control, we're working on a novel science-enhancing AI technology payload supported by the Canadian Space Agency. So that consists of AI algorithms to classify the terrain of the lunar surface, which essentially makes lunar rovers smart for scientists and also reduces the operational workload of scientists on the ground. And it characterizes geological features from camera images taken by a lunar rover, or it can even be potentially used during an astronaut spacewalk and as they explore the lunar surface to detect and select features of scientific interest to sample. And in the future, other international partners will also provide important contributions to Gateway. So Japan has announced plans to contribute habitation components and also logistics resupply for the astronauts. The European Space Agency is also going to provide habitation and also refueling modules, in addition to lunar communications. So now you know a bit more about the Artemis program and also the Space Agency's plans, but these space agencies aren't the only ones with plans to go back to the moon. China is separately making preliminary preparations for a crewed lunar mission in the 2030s, and China was actually the third country to put a human into space with its own rockets, after the former Soviet Union and the USA. The commercial space industry has also caused a shift in space policy, with NASA recently selecting commercial companies including SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Dynetics to begin development of the Artemis human landing systems for astronauts to land on the surface of the moon and live in for up to a week. And Blue Origin, founded by Amazon's Jeff Bezos, that you might have heard of, had originally proposed their Blue Moon lunar landing system to cost-effectively soft land large amounts of mass onto the lunar surface, which we'll need for a future lunar settlement. So you could think of it as a commercial logistics delivery service similar to Amazon for the moon. Now, their landing system could be taking humans to the surface of the moon for the first time in 50 years, which is incredible. But why are we going to the moon? Well, that's something that global space agencies and companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin agree on. Humanity needs to return to the moon, firstly because missions to the lunar surface also offer valuable resources, including helium-3. But moreover, the moon is a scientific treasure trove. It's a repository of 4 billion years of solar system history, and it's a place to observe its Earth and the universe. But most importantly, the moon will be the first place where humans learn to live on another celestial body. Just 3 days from the Earth, the moon has low gravity and natural resources that make it an ideal location to prepare people and machines for venturing further into space. It serves as a stepping stone to demonstrate key technologies to enable longer exploration of the solar system, including Mars. It's also going to be difficult and resupply to future moon bases to a large degree, so we need to learn to be self-reliant to travel further out into the solar system. On the moon, we can test ways in which lunar soil or regolith can be used to create mission consumables, which include propellant, oxygen, and water, in addition to providing shielding from radiation, and this allows humans to live on the lunar surface without being completely reliant on regular deliveries from Earth, and the technical term is in situ resource utilization. But where are we going on the moon? Well, since the 1960s, most of the moon missions, including the Apollo program, have only explored the near side of the moon that you can see from Earth, basically only a gift shot of the moon by exploring the equatorial regions during the Apollo of this 4.5 billion year old museum of solar system history. So we've successfully carried out about 30 missions to the lunar surface to date. However, humanity's next destination on the moon will be unlike anywhere you've ever been before. It's the extreme and alien landscape of the lunar South Pole. The lunar South Pole is the oldest and largest impact crater basin on the moon at nearly 2,500 kilometers in diameter, and it's 12 kilometers deep at its lower point. There are areas of permanent darkness and cold, which never rise above minus 173 degrees Celsius, which is really cold, where water, ice, and other chemicals can be trapped for billions of years, and with which humanity can create this propellant, oxygen, and water to resupply our astronauts and sustainably live on the moon. So, say you're an astronaut that's just reached the moon, what will you do once you're on the lunar surface? You'll carry out spacewalks, you'll conduct geology in the field, you'll deploy science experiments, and if you're lucky, you'll get to drive some lunar rovers. But to explore the surface of the moon, the first women on the moon will also need a spacesuit that fits them. And we know in the past there have been issues with sizing for NASA's current spacesuits used for the International Space Station. And the design of a spacesuit might seem simple since they're covered with a fabric thermal micromedia garment, but it's in fact one of the most complex technological developments to carry out. A spacesuit is essentially the world's smallest spacecraft. You have to design the systems that you need for the spacecraft and then you shrink them around a person. You'll need a life support system, oxygen to breathe, you have to scrub out the carbon dioxide, and you'll need thermal control for the atmosphere, among others. It's a complicated process requiring knowledge of textiles, engineering, biology, material science, and atmospheric science. Right now, astronauts going to an international space and have a specialized spacesuit geared for spacewalks in low Earth orbit. But different suits will be needed if we want to go to the moon, and they'll have to be tailored to the lunar environment. And during my own career, I've been fortunate to work at the European Space Agency's Astronaut Centre to contribute to the development of a spacesuit called the skin suit, and that aims to prevent bone and muscle loss in space. In space, astronauts lose 2 to 3% of their bone mass in 6 months, and they grow 4 to 6 centimeters taller, which impacts their space health, and that can be quite painful for them as well. And astronaut Anne McLean grew about 2 inches in 3 months on the space station. So the skin suit that we designed is worn inside the spacecraft, and it provides loading onto the astronaut's body that essentially recreates the effect of gravity on their skeleton. Each skin suit is individually fitted to every astronaut, and a tailor takes over 150 measurements of the astronaut's body, along with their mass and height, to customize the suit. The skin suit has been worn on the space station by Danish European Space Agency astronaut Andreas Mogensen, and it was most recently evaluated by the French ESA astronaut Thomas Pesquet during his 6-month mission. The suit aims to improve spinal health in a microgravity environment and prevent painful spinal growth. It's been amazing to have worked on the initial prototypes of the spacesuit, and having seen it being used on the space station by astronauts is the ultimate reward. And spacesuit engineers design spacesuits for people for a variety of dimensions. These different combinations of measurements of the human body are incorporated into spacesuits designed and mobility are tested. The current NASA spacesuits on board the space station, in fact, were actually designed in the 1970s, and they're made up of modular parts providing multiple sizing options, and they've been actually used ever since. And according to a 2017 NASA report, about 11 of these 18 original spacesuits are actually still flight operational. They've been partially redesigned and refurbished, but they're used on board the International Space Station. And they're serviced every about 6 years, or after 25 spacewalks. So the first woman to carry out a spacewalk was Soviet cosmonaut Svetlana Savskaya on 25th July 1984, which is almost 40 years ago now. And of more than 5,500 people who've been to space, around 10% have been female. And until last year, spacewalk teams have either been all male, female, with 15 women carried out on spacewalk. So for comparison, there have been around 200 male spacewalkers. In the particular case recently that related to the first planned all-female spacewalk that you might have heard of, it was eventually reassigned to another astronaut because the original astronaut decided that was taking part in the spacewalk found that a medium-sized, hard upper torso of a spacesuit would fit her better after her initial spacewalk. And that's quite normal because astronauts often train in a multitude of sizing, and their sizing and preference can change on orbit as their bodies adapt to a microgravity environment. So the spinal elongation as you get taller during missions on the International Space Station, and also fluid shifts. But however, on Friday, 18th October 2019, history was made. And NASA astronauts Jessica Meir and Christina Koch ventured outside the Quest airlock on the International Space Station and carried out the first all-women spacewalk, a feat long overdue. These spacesuits are actually now being designed for NASA's Artemis program to fit a much wider population as we go to the moon. And to overcome the issues of these previous suits, the new suit that you can see is called the Exploration Extravehicular Mobility Suit, or XEMU. The NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine recently remarked that it's very possible the next 2 people on the moon will both be women. But what we don't know yet who will be the first woman to step foot on the surface of the moon. And before we look to answer that, let's take a step back and look at the women whose incredible efforts have supported this extraordinary goal to explore the moon. Women have been a crucial part of humanity's race to explore. Recently, the story of these amazing women, including the late mathematical genius Katherine Johnson, have been commemorated in a movie titled Hidden Figures. Katherine played a role in every major US space program, from calculating the trajectory for Alan Shepard's inaugural flight, who was the first American in space, to the space shuttle era. Her inspirational work for the US space program since 1953 predates the creation of NASA itself. She calculated the trajectory for the 1969 Apollo 11 flight to the moon in 1970 and Apollo 13's mission to the moon. When Apollo 13's mission was aborted, she helped to safely return the crew to Earth 4 days later through her work on backup procedures and charts. When NASA began to use electronic computers for the first time to calculate astronaut John Glenn's orbit around the Earth, she was relied upon to verify the computer's calculations. Katherine Johnson, along with her colleagues Dorothy Vaughan and Mary Jackson, served as the brains behind one of the greatest operations in US history: the momentous launch of astronaut John Glenn into orbit and a safe return. In the words of former NASA Deputy Administrator Darwin Newman, Catherine literally wrote the textbook on rocket science. We're also fortunate that Catherine insisted on asking questions and on relentlessly pursuing the answers. Or you're fortunate that when faced with adversity of racial and gender barriers, you found the courage to tell them I'm coming. I'm personally really glad this movie has been made and highlighting the significant work these women have achieved. But Katherine Johnson isn't the only woman whose achievements have been unsung for over 40 years. Throughout my career in the space industry, from contributing to the design of a new spacesuit called the Skin Suit, and also to recently developing operations for the European Robotic Arm at ESA Technology Centre in the Netherlands, which will be actually launched for space station next year and help astronauts carry out spacewalks, I've met some amazing women, especially other positive female role models, and I really think we need those role models out there, tangible and visible, to be able to inspire the next generation of young girls to become astronauts or be whatever they want to be. I realised that their achievements weren't being shared, so I started Rocket Women to give these women an incredible platform to spread their advice and ensure that their incredible voices are being heard. So I'm interviewing women around the world in STEM, particularly in space, and posting their interviews on Rocket Women, along with advice to encourage girls to be involved in STEM. As Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, said, "You can't be what you can't see." It's one of my favourite quotes, and it's absolutely true. As I was going along my career journey, I noticed that over the years, as I progressed to each next step, the number of women who progressed with me to ultimately choose a career in engineering decreased, something called the leaky pipeline syndrome. And in fact, if you look at the numbers in the UK, only 12% of the engineering workforce is female. And according to recent research from the Royal Academy of Engineering, less than 8% of engineering professionals are from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds, compared to 12% of the UK population. But why is this important? Well, Rocket Women believes that the lack of gender and racial diversity in STEM industries, including the space sector, is not only an issue of inequality, but also affects the engineering that we do and the systems that we create. We need to be able to enable engineering as a profession to reflect more of society to prevent unconscious biases from being implemented into design. My passion and the goal of Rocket Women is to work to reverse this trend by empowering girls globally to consider a career in STEM and supporting them throughout their careers. Rocket Women aims to empower diverse young women to choose a career in STEM so we can improve the current percentage of female science and engineering talent globally, and also ensure that vital technological solutions that we create in the world today are both built by and represent society as a whole. Now, more than ever, we need 100% of the talent available to solve the really hard problems that we face in the world and in the future as well. And from developing new spacesuits to exploring the surface of the moon, to even AI and novel facial recognition algorithms, we need to ensure that the creators and developers of these systems represent the range of backgrounds, cultures, and experiences of the diverse users to prevent unconscious biases from being incorporated into design and its application. So how do we empower young women to become rocket women, and what can we learn from the women that have paved the way to enable the first women to step foot on the moon? Inspire young. I'm fortunate to have realised my passion at a young age, and I told my physics teacher in Year 7 that I wanted to work in NASA's mission control. And throughout my education, this drive was supported, and 12 years later, it led me to fulfil my dreams, working on International Space Station operations at the German Aerospace Centre, Germany's answer to mission control. I was lucky. I had great parents and teachers around me at that age who cultivated that interest and encouraged me to study space. My parents really helped me greatly, taking me to the National Space Centre in Leicester and the Science Museum in London on the weekends to really experience space hardware firsthand, and thankfully let me spend hours reading about space. But whilst I was making them trudge around behind me in museums, they were helping to increase my science capital, which is the exposure of young women in particular to science both in school and outside in their everyday lives. So this includes meeting women in STEM, reading about science, watching TV shows about space, visiting the Science Museum. Girls really need to be able to see themselves carrying out a role in STEM in the future. If you can't be, you can't see. This quote by Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, summed up the importance of this. It's one of my favourite quotes, and it's absolutely true. Young girls need to see role models in whatever careers they may choose, just so they can picture themselves doing those jobs someday, she says. Change the stereotype. More diverse representation is needed of smart people and women in movies and in media. We need more women and more minorities represented as scientists and engineers of popular culture, reflecting the world around us. The rhetoric also needs to be changed to ensure that popular culture communicates to the next generation that women are just as capable and intelligent in STEM. Through visualizing creative women of color and role models in STEM and taking an intersectional approach, it will help young girls feel more confident and included when deciding on taking a career in STEM. It's important to help young women in particular realize the impact they can have with a degree in STEM and make a positive difference in the world. Female role models are essential to provide young women with examples to look up to when they're making the most critical decisions in their education or career. Representation certainly matters, and scholarships play a pivotal role in encouraging diverse, talented individuals to pursue opportunities in STEM that may have not had that chance otherwise. Through Rocket Women, proceeds from our apparel will go towards scholarships for women who choose to study engineering and science. Humanize the technology itself. One thing that has always helped to portray the difference that career in STEM can make is, rather than thinking about a technology itself, think about the impact that technology will make on people. Really humanize the technology. For example, consider the impact of satellites. Initiatives are now being taken to provide affordable internet access worldwide throughout the constellation of microsatellites, which is a project with the potential to have an unprecedented impact on those around the world without access to basic communication. Rural communities will have high-speed internet access where once there was none, providing education and knowledge to those currently without. The impact of the project is where I believe you can inspire an increasing number of young women to choose a career in science and engineering. As Darwin Newman said, she's the former NASA administrator, you don't have to be the best at maths and science. You don't have to be number one or number two. You just have to want to help humankind. That should be the passion. You don't have to be the best, just be proficient. We need to change the conversation to know that you're all in. There also seems to be a disconnect between young women in particular, between wanting to make a difference and knowing that the positive impact on the world that a career in STEM can make. There are also cultural barriers that we need to overcome. My background is British Asian, so although my parents were really supportive of my interest in space and science, there was some pressure to study a traditional job for a girl, so become a dentist or a doctor, a pharmacist or a teacher, which are all great jobs, and they were considered a safe choice and acceptable job for a girl in the South Asian culture. So I worked as a dental nurse on the weekends while studying at sixth form to eventually become a dentist. It helped my parents, and I realised that although I enjoyed some aspects of the role on the medical side, becoming a dentist wasn't for me. But based at the European Space Agency as a contractor, I worked on some of the medical aspects of preparing a launch campaign, so where the team goes to the launch site, which in this case was in Kazakhstan in Baikonur, to prepare the European robotic arm for launch. For the mission I worked on, and also at the European Space Agency Space Medicine Office, having some background in this has really helped. But ultimately, we need to address the lack of representation of BAME women in science and engineering to ensure that their stories are visible and to be able to inspire and support both the future career decisions that young women will make, whilst also providing their parents and peers with examples of successful careers. So through Rocket Women, we're aiming to ensure these stories of diverse women in STEM globally are visible. Know You Belong. Ellen Stoffen is a director of the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., and also the former NASA chief scientist. She said that sometimes I felt like I was part of the team until someone said something that made me realize that I was a woman. As I got more confident, realized that they really need me in the room. Katherine Johnson also wasn't made to feel welcome in that room, but she knew that she belonged there. So channel your inner Katherine Johnson and find that power. Know that you belong in that room to get the work done. They need you. Get to the starting line. After launching to space on both NASA's space shuttle and then the Russian Soyuz rocket, NASA astronaut Sunita Williams will be one of the first female NASA astronauts to fly to the International Space Station on board the new US commercial vehicles being developed, and she'll fly on board Boeing's Starliner. Sunita formerly held the record for the longest spacewalk time by a female astronaut, and she completed a triathlon in space, and she was the second female commander of the International Space Station. Sunita said that understanding how things work and being an engineer led me to become a helicopter pilot and eventually to NASA. The path doesn't necessarily need to be straight, but don't limit yourself to what you know. Go out and try new things. Some of those things when I was young I would have considered a failure, but you just need to get to the starting line. She was also one of the original inspirations for me to start Rocket Women. I've looked up to her since I was young, and I met her while I was based at the European Astronaut Centre in Germany, and that was really one of the highlights of my career to date. She took time out of her busy mission training schedule to support me with my master's thesis on spacewalks and spacesuit design, whilst giving me some excellent career advice as well. And I really wanted that experience and opportunity to be available to every young girl around the world, so I started Rocket Women to share the stories of these incredible women, along with starting a scholarship program as well. So inspire young. If you can't see, you can't be. Change your stereotype. Humanize the technology itself. Know you belong. Get to the starting line. One challenge that relates to all of these is the importance of role models when you're young. And starting your career, it's how to imagine you're doing something when you don't see someone doing that job. But things are changing in the industry. The 2013 NASA astronaut class is 50% female, the highest female ratio selected, bringing the percentage of female NASA astronauts in the astronaut corps to almost 30%. And that's 30 years after Savali became the first American woman in space, so NASA's really looking forward. The recent 2017 astronaut class actually had 5 girls out of 12 astronauts selected, with 2 astronauts selected at 29 years old. So if you think about it, that's close to 10 years between completing year 13 in secondary school to being selected as an astronaut. Zena Cordman, at the age of 29, didn't know if she had enough experience to be an astronaut to meet the bare minimum requirements. While studying for her doctorate, she applied anyway and became a NASA astronaut out of 18,000 applications made. She said, "I've got nothing to lose. This will be a really cool experience, no matter what," which is some great advice. Zena prioritized her passion and she persevered. Another story that I wanted to tell you is of Anima Patel Savali. She grew up in India and faced criticism and taunts when she would tell people that she wanted to become an astronaut. But her inspiration was India's only astronaut at the time, Rakesh Sharma. Growing up, she thought that she'd become a fighter pilot like him and then become an astronaut. Even though India wasn't accepting female fighter pilots yet, she was hopeful that things would change by the time that she graduated. To be a fighter pilot, she had to study engineering or physics, and growing up in a traditional household, her dad said that she had to study near home. So she studied engineering and physics and applied to be a fighter pilot, even though it said only males can apply. She was refused on one criteria, that she was slightly short-sighted and she needed perfect 20/20 vision. On the back of that, she went on to fight for an education, as her dad said that she should do a 3-year program, as there were marriage proposals coming for her, and he couldn't guarantee if she could complete her program, if he found a boy that was suitable for her and decided to get married. But she persevered, and her mum really supported her by telling her dad that she was smart and ambitious, to let her study, and that she negotiate with her in-laws and her husband to allow her to complete her studies. So thanks to her mum, Anima got to study and complete her degree. And having worked to rewrite Indian traditions, Anima moved to the US, completed 2 master's degrees, and now she works at NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston as an Orion spacecraft simulations lab manager, supporting humanity's quest to return to the moon. She's also brilliantly a scientist astronaut, and also for a candidate for Project Possum. Gets up at 4 a.m. every day to care for her family and 2 boys, whilst prioritizing her passion. So to be an astronaut or work in STEM, you have to study something that you love and are passionate about. So you have to enjoy what you study and the work that you're doing, and it's important to pay attention to what your passion is for. So inspire young. If you can't see, you can't be. Change the stereotype, humanize the technology itself, get to the starting line, and prioritize your passion and persevere. Inspired by the incredible endeavors and journeys of persistence and determination of the rocket women of today, these are the tenets that will help to encourage the next generation of young women to make a difference through a career in science and technology. So, who will be the first woman to step foot on the surface of the moon? NASA said the first woman who will step foot on the surface of the moon will have already flown to the International Space Station previously and had experience in space. So currently, there are some of the female members of the NASA astronaut corps, including NASA astronaut Sunita Williams, who we've heard about, and recently Zena Cordman, who is yet to fly. But what we do know is that the first woman to step foot on the surface of the moon in the next decade is yet to be selected by NASA, and we know that her story will be remembered and recorded in the history books forever, with her name as recognizable as the late Neil Armstrong's is today. And as we look forward to that remarkable day, it's also important to recognize that rocket women in whose footsteps we followed, including Katherine Johnson, for their overwhelming strength in the face of adversity and for inspiring future generations of young women to follow their dreams to the stars. We hope that we, the next generation, can make these women proud by working hard and honouring their incredible legacy. So remember, always channel your inner Katherine Johnson and always know that you belong.
So welcome everyone. Again, we are now live for the Q&A with Vanita, and you can submit your questions for Vanita via the discussion board on the side. So just first of all, welcome Vanita, and thank you so much for such a great talk. You covered an awful lot there. Yeah, we have a question has come through already for you. It's from Sarah, and she has asked, how did you get your first break? And she said that she has a daughter who is all in on space. So if you could say something about that, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so I think a great way to get into the space industry is, I think, to follow your passion, like I mentioned in my talk as well. And so really study what you enjoy. And there are lots of different industries that are related to space, from everything from satellites to human spaceflight to medicine to geography. So it's really a very broad industry. I think my first break was when I was at King's College London, and so I was studying maths and physics with astrophysics there, and so I went to the International Space University. So I think that was a great way for me to get into the space industry, and also just know the breadth of it, and just how much of an impact you can make in space. And there are lots of scholarships as well to attend. So in the UK, there's a scholarship from the UK Space Agency, for example, that you can apply to. So even though postgraduate courses and masters can be quite costly, there are lots of opportunities and help to get there. And I certainly made use of them along the way as well. So from scholarships from there, and it's also a Rocket Women Scholarship as well. So we're definitely trying to make sure that everybody has the same opportunities that those of us that are lucky enough to work in space have now. So yeah, absolutely, I'd say definitely go for it and follow what you're passionate about and follow your dreams.
Thank you. And just, I guess, touching off that, if you had advice for your 10-year-old self, if you can think back, what would that be?
I would say really just follow your dreams and do what you're passionate about. I say the road to the space industry and also to follow your dreams can be hard, but it's definitely worth it. And I think just to make sure that you have support along the way. So that could be anything from your teachers to parents as well, but just reach out there and find people that can help you. I think myself and lots of other people are always available to answer any questions to make sure you have support along the way. So definitely reach out and ask people for help. I'm sure you'll get there.
Great, that's good to know. Also, one of your topics touched on, I guess the wider, benefit for humanity, and you were saying, about how it's important to keep that in mind, as your goal going forward. And thought maybe you could say a little bit more about that, about how going to space impacts for us. If you could say something about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think space is unique, is that it's a really unifying force. So right now, individuals, space agencies like NASA or the European Space Agency and commercial companies around the world, they come from a variety of countries and backgrounds, but they're all united by their common interest to discover and explore. So those of us that work in the space industry are really very passionate about what we do, and we also really enjoy it, which is great. But I think one of the great things is right now on the commercial side of things, so kind of separate from those space agencies, we're on the precipice of making space available to everybody as well and accessible to everyone. So there are so many companies working to do that. So from suborbital flights, from companies including Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, to even flights around the moon as well in the future as well. So there's lots of different experiences. And in the past, the national space agencies have kind of built and launched the spaceships that carry astronauts to space. But now this is actually changing, and it's ultimately ushering in a new era of space travel as well, which is really exciting. But I think for me, what is really fascinating about space tourism, it's going to help encourage more of humanity than ever before to view the Earth from space without divisions. And that's something called the overview effect as well. So being able to actually view the Earth from space, astronauts, when they come back, they say that it really changes them as a person as well. So the view from space really reinforces our interconnectivity. So from looking at the fragility of the Earth from space, it's really evident. So you can see the forest fires that might be raging across the world as well. So I think there's a realization that these impacts as well are not just local tragedies and issues, but also affect the whole world together. So I think that's one of the biggest impacts that astronauts say when they come back from space has on them. And you can just think about how that will change as well humanity if you have more of a population being able to view the Earth from this perspective. I think that could be really powerful in the future.
Sorry, I muted myself by accident there. Also, we have a question. How do you motivate yourself to keep going when things are hard? From Arvind.
That's a really great question. I think I've always looked towards my goals. So I knew from a young age that I wanted to work in the space industry as well. So I was really inspired by reading about books about space when I was younger. And when I was younger, I saw an image of an astronaut in a book, and she had brown hair like me, and there was a British flag on her arm. And the caption next to the image said that this is Helen Sharman, and she's the first British astronaut. And I think for me in that moment, even though I was around like 5 or 6 years old in the library with my parents, that she really became a role model to me, and she showed me that my dreams are possible. So I knew I wanted to be an astronaut from a young age, but I didn't know how. And so when I was at secondary school, I printed out the NASA astronaut guidelines, and I glued these to the inside cover of my secondary school folder. And they really showed me the steps that got me to where I am now. So I knew I needed to have a bachelor's degree in maths, physics, engineering, or biology, seemingly in a STEM field. And so I did that. That was really the first step for me to get to where I am now. And I think when things get really hard, I think about why I do this. And I think one of the great things is, I kind of touched on this in my talk, as well as just thinking about the impact that your work has on humanity as well. I think engineering and physics is a really great way to make such a significant difference as well. So I think if you really look at the big picture and look at the big picture of what you're doing, is kind of think about that gets you through the tough days ahead.
Yes, I think it's time now for our first break, where you will have time to look at some of the virtual stands and the networking area. But just before that, we're going to have a short presentation from Liz Butler of Computer Centre, and she's going to tell us more about the importance of networking for women.